Great. Awesome. So I think I'll go for 45 minutes and I'm going to set a timer and then we'll take a little break. I don't have material for, or when I timed this earlier, it wasn't a full hour and a half, but maybe with people's questions, it might actually be that long. So we'll see, but I'll just start a timer. I won't go into the overall sequence of the 4 sessions because I assume that you've already seen that. But the content today that I want to get at is sort of what are the skills involved with grant writing, right? What is a grant proposal at a very high kind of conceptual level? What are some common mistakes with producing grant proposals that people tend to make? People who are beginning and people who are advanced. Where do grant proposals fit in the big picture, right? Both in an individual career, but also kind of in the institution. And then what is a good funding opportunity? And along the way, I think there's some things that we can call some bonus material, right? A little primer on how to write a grant in 3 weeks. Right? How to read a call. So how do experts read a funding call that's useful for you to know? And then we'll close with getting everybody onto Research Connect and getting everyone set up with a profile that they can use that will give them personalized information about grant opportunities, fellowship opportunities, and things like that. There's a philosophy to this entire set of courses, which is based on this notion of cognitive apprenticeship. Writing grants is a really high level thinking and doing activity with elements that are not necessarily explicitly taught. People are expected to get it via osmosis. And if there is any explicit training, often it involves someone handing you a template for a grant application, giving you a deadline, and telling you the other parts of the application, and then just letting you go. I think of the grant proposal as a collection of tasks. So a lot of my work is aimed at making explicit these tasks and making explicit how you do these tasks. So in some ways I work kind of as an anthropologist, I guess. What is the culture of grant writing and what is the culture of the people who are learning how to do grants, and how can I best provide them, train them to do the tasks. And in other ways I'm working as a designer, right? So how can you build an environment where people get the tasks and are able to build the tasks in the way that they need to. Some stuff about me. I'm not going to bore you with the long story, but the short version is that I've been in and around academia for the last 30 years, and in and around grants and funding for about the last 20. I've also worked as a researcher and a journalist and an entrepreneur, and all of these activities have involved pitching or proposing or trying to get someone else interested in my ideas. And I think it's also notable that I submit grants too. So in 2021, I submitted 7 proposals, 5 were for grants, 2 were for fellowships. I take my own advice, and what I'm sharing with you is both things that I've learned from people who were more expert than I am, and also things that I've learned myself along the way. So, number 1, what do you need in order to be good at grant writing? Which is not necessarily like that you're going to be successful, but being good at it means that you continue to want to do it. So ambition, right, is obviously part of that. And if you were in the PhD meeting back in December when I talked about this, I talked about writing grants as a way of having an impact academically out in the world. So that ambition is an ambition to have an impact, and the knowledge about how you are going to have that impact. It helps to, I mean, you'll have to understand about how to communicate ideas, and not just communicate ideas, but how to package them. So for people who are consuming them on the other side and having to make decisions about them. In order to do that, you will have to understand why your project matters, and not fantasizing about how you hope that it matters, but really kind of realistically rooted in this world, in the world that you live in, right? And talking about why your project matters, and also what you bring to the scene that other people don't have. This is a competitive process. There's lots of other people who are thinking along the same lines. So what is it that you have that other people don't have, and how does your approach and your project connect to the kinds of things that society finds valuable, right? We can critique social values and what society finds valuable and interesting. If you don't want to do it that way, then you need to find a different society. But we have to deal with the society that we have. It helps to understand the role and the mind of the reviewer, of the people who are going to be reading and reviewing the grant. And this will be a lot of session 2 next week. This is why I stress that as early as possible, it's super important for you to get any sort of experience, and as much experience as you can, doing any kind of reviewing at any level. So looking at abstracts, looking at paper submissions, looking at, and part of what I'm doing at the faculty is trying to find and build opportunities for PhD students and postdocs and early career researchers to be involved in that kind of stuff. You really gain a lot of information about how to structure proposals and what a good proposal is from seeing lots of other people try making their best guesses about how to do that. Some other things. It really helps to have strong personal and professional networks and supports, both inside your department and outside, inside your field and outside, inside the faculty, inside the university and outside. You will be relying on those people in lots of different ways. Having some project management skills, knowing how long it takes you to work, how long it takes you to do stuff, having some structures for creating schedules and then holding yourself accountable to those schedules, and making those schedules visible to other people so that you can include them in your process. You're going to have a willingness to understand and follow all of the policies that are involved, departmental, faculty, university, and funder level processes. And it will also help you to know how to bend them, or how to find ways around them in certain circumstances. And we'll talk about that in session 3. And critically, if you're writing grants in the Faculty of Law, you want to understand who does what in the faculty that's related to this stuff, how you get in touch with them, and how to work with them, both as the function of what they do, but also as individuals. So that's going to be really critical too. And just one last thing, it really helps if you have a sense of humor and a light attitude and a kind of appreciation for how absurd things can be, how you can work really hard with the best of intentions and have a really awesome idea, and things just don't turn out the way that you hope. And that's just life. So if you can do all of these things, right? and maybe you bring people on, other people on to give you support for some of these things, then I think you'll be set up for success in the long run. Does anybody have any questions about that first section? And I'm going to stop at the end of each section and just check in with people and see how they're doing. But does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay. So the second part, what is a grant proposal, right? At a very high level, at a very high kind of conceptual level. It's kind of a strange question because we live in a world where like the grant proposal is kind of everywhere, and people talk about it, you know, as if they know what it is. But I think that people kind of misunderstand its function. So the grant proposal is not about exchange, right? It's not, I give you some nice words and you give me some money. It's also not about promises. So I tell you what you want to hear and you give me money. It's actually something different, which is, it's a highly specialized, targeted genre of science communication and marketing. Aimed at a very small audience of people, right? So if you understand what you're doing at that level, then I think that's really a critical piece. Which means, number one, that even if you don't get the funding, you have still done the communication, because there are people who have read it, right, who have encountered your work and have encountered the work of the Faculty of Law at Maastricht University and know something about the kind of work that goes on here. So that's kind of the broader context in which the proposal works. So it's critical to understand the proposal, you know, as a genre in that way. And the way that I think about it is I break it down into two parts, right? It's the sum of two things: compliance plus X. What do I mean by each of those? Compliance. So compliance is, you know, all of the requirements that you got to do in order to, you know, that they have. So how many pages is it going to be? The words, what sort of fonts, things like that. Do you need to repeat keywords or use specific kinds of language? Providing required content. So you have to put in a CV, you have to put in some sample publications, you have to talk about key outputs and stuff like that. But it also includes other kinds of you know, administrative documents like an ethics statement, something about human subject protection, protection of data in a data management plan. You might have to talk about gender diversity and the way that that works in your project. And then last but not least, the budget is an important compliance piece that has lots of implications for the proposal, right? What is X? X is a little more ambiguous and a little more nebulous, but X is the part where you are in the proposal serving the reader with your communication, right? And most importantly, communicating why your idea is significant and why it's distinct. And there will be lots of opportunities to talk about that in later sessions. X also includes, you know, showcasing yourself as the researcher, not being shy, and talking about why you are the best person to be doing a project, or why your team is the best one to be doing that. Also, continually arguing why you, why this solution, why this approach is better than other ones that exist out there. So in session 3, we'll be looking at the compliance piece, and sessions 1, 2, and 4 will really be focused on the X. So I think it's important to point out that the compliance side that's kind of how you lose by not being compliant, or finding, reviewers finding some sort of fault with those kinds of things. You win stuff, right, by doing X, and by doing X in a particular way. Now, X is harder to learn, right? And you'll be constantly trying to optimize and get better at X over the course of your career. And, like we all are, everyone is. And you figure out different ways to do it over the course of your career. But there's another way of looking at the proposal, which is not really as an object per se, but kind of a cluster or a group of tasks and activities. So it's like a snowball. And I was thinking about this earlier, going, oh, maybe everybody doesn't come from a place where they have snowballs, but to make a snowball, you take some snow and you add it to other snow and you add it to other snow until you have, right, a thing that you can throw, hopefully. So the more you stick to it, the more you stick to it, the more can stick to it. So you need a core, right? You need a core part of it. And next week, I'll be talking about a core, the right sort of core to use for the snowball. But another thing is that in the snowball, there's no snowflake that's more important than any of the others. So I think that people who write proposals often say, oh, my content, my scientific content is the most important part, and all of the other stuff doesn't really matter. Don't think of it that way. Think of it that all of these pieces have equal weight in the snowball, right? Another thing about the snowball is, in order to make the snowball bigger, you have to it touches other things in your environment. So you're going to be relying on other people to help you build that snowball so that you can throw it. So one rule for having a really good snowball fight, again, maybe for people who didn't have good snowball fights, but you have to have a lot of snowballs. You have to be able to throw them, throw a lot of them, right? So how do you have a lot of snowballs? This is a calendar by which you could assemble the compliance parts and the X parts of a proposal in 3 weeks. This is idealized, right? This would be a really great world if you could do this, but it's largely what I used back in December when I was putting together a grant proposal. And I did this with a full-time job and with a family. So I was cramming a lot of stuff in. But the X's here, they represent obviously the X part of the proposal. The C represents the compliance units. The large flower on the 28th is the major deadline, right? The small flower on the 26th is like your own deadline. Say that you want to have everything due, ready to go on the 26th, so that you have a couple days to maybe submit the thing, or you're not under pressure and you don't have to rush. The black heart, what that represents is the day that you need to get materials to the dean of the faculty in order to approve the grant. He needs 3 days before the submission date in order to give approval, and he needs a summary of the project and a budget, right? So the budget will be, you'll be formulating that on the C days, and you'll be formulating the X part on the X days. So this is a schedule by which you can spend one whole week just working on the X stuff. What is the idea? What's the project? How are you going to structure it? Then you put it on the back burner and you just let it simmer, and you turn and you focus on the compliance pieces. How am I going to write those? This is where you're also, connecting to other people who can help you. And then you return to the content part, see how your thinking might have changed after spending time with the compliance bits, and you make those changes, and then you spend a number of days working on both things together. This is, not prioritizing the X and cramming the C in on the side. This is giving the C and the X equal amount of weight, and the kind of weight that it needs. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this in 3 weeks, right? Partly because it really requires that you have some other things in place. So this calendar assumes that you've done a substantial amount of pre-writing on the topic, that you're not starting from scratch, that you already have some momentum, maybe you have some papers, just some other stuff, some other material that you can pull from to put into the grant. It also assumes that it's an individual grant. You can move a lot more quickly if it's just you, right? And you don't have to deal with other people. Maybe you could do this with other people if you have worked really closely with them and maybe have done some other grants with them and you have some text that you can pull over. It also assumes that there's a relatively, that the grant is kind of small. We're not talking 30 pages of writing here, right? We're probably talking 3 to 5. This also assumes that some parts are pre-assembled. So what can you pre-assemble? Well, your CV, right? That should be just ready to go. Key outputs, things that you have already worked on that are connected to the project and why they matter. That should already be ready to go. Talking about some other ways that you can structure some pre-writing to make this process easier. It helps if you know something about the project structure or know the ways to structure a project. If you're going to hire other people, or if you think you're going to need people to help, where can you find them? And how are you going to compensate them? And it also, so it assumes responsive collaborators. So if you're working with other researchers, that those people are getting back to you in time. If you're asking people for feedback, that they get back in time. And that people like myself, or Deanna, who works on budgets at the faculty, we all strive to be responsive. But you should think of us as collaborators as well, right? We all strive to be as responsive as we can to you. Sometimes there's a lot of traffic and we have a lot of things to do, but we will always strive to get back to you in as quickly as we can. And that schedule, of course, assumes that you don't have any competing life, right? That you are not sick, that you don't have to travel, that you don't have other deadlines to work on, and stuff like that. Does anybody have any questions about that? About what a proposal is, or what that calendar, how that calendar looks? Nope. Okay. What are some common mistakes with grant proposals, right? So, 3 general kinds of pitfalls. One, pitfalls that make the proposal not successful, right? That you might not really think about. I mean, obviously, if the thing isn't written well, it's not going to do well. So I'm not going to talk about that, or that'll come up next week. There's a couple common pitfalls in the writing process. One is not doing enough pre-writing and letting the application template shape the idea. So what I see a lot of people doing is the first time they ever set out to write down what their idea is when they open up the template for the application. And now I'm realizing that I should have had a template to show you here, but it's sort of requirements of this. It gives you a box where you can put in 500 words or 2,000 characters or something like that. People often start writing in that window. Don't do that, right? Because your idea is what it is. You should write it fully somewhere else in its 2,000 word length, and then take the best words, the best 500 words, and bring them over to the template. Also, in terms of writing process, just in general, the people the proposal doesn't serve the reader, doesn't give the reader what it is that the reader needs in terms of information when the reader wants it or when the reader expects it. And that is going to be part of the fourth session, which, when I think about everything that I have to say, the fourth session of this series is the one that is in some ways the most critical one, because, well, I'll save that for four. Ignoring the question why, and not answering that question, not interrogating your proposal at every single level. Why am I doing it this way? Why should they fund it? Why should they pay attention? And so forth. So not doing that, I think, often leads to a proposal that's not successful. And then there's kind of project process. So not knowing how the project scope matches onto the budget, or kind of winging that or making that up, that will make the proposal not successful, because someone will notice that. Not getting diverse feedback early enough. And I think for me as a grant writer, this is my weakness, right? Getting feedback from people, because I kind of tend to like to work alone. But I'm learning to overcome that. Another problem with project process is developing a budget too late, and maybe not understanding all of the parameters of the things that go into a budget. And we'll talk about that in the third session. So these are some of the things that I think this series of trainings is gonna address. Common pitfalls, things that make you not happy, even if the grant is successful, right? If you do things last minute, you're not going to be happy. Now, people have different working styles, and some people like the adrenaline. I don't like the adrenaline. I like to build in lots of little, I like to make the big project into chunks and finish the chunks and feel good about the chunks, right? Rather than work really hard in one giant burst and feel like a hero, and then totally deplete myself and exhaust myself, which, if you think about it from the perspective of sustainability, right? If you've burned yourself out, the idea of picking yourself up and doing this again, especially if you don't get the grant, then it's going to be a lot harder. Whereas if you understand that there is some good things to be had in the process, then you'll be more willing to do it again. I won't say that it's fun necessarily, and we're not talking about pleasure, but it can be rewarding in its own sort of weird way. Again, not getting diverse feedback early, that can, make you not happy about the process. Not having anything else you get from the process. I have a lot of constraints on my time. So why am I even writing grants at all? Well, I'm also writing a book. So if I can find another way to articulate the idea, right? And I do that for the grant, it's like slightly different audience, slightly different constraints, then I get something out of it because I take it as like writing work, right? And I can take stuff from the grant and bring that back to my other things, just like I can take things from my pre-writing or from my papers and bring those into the grant. So if there's something else that you get from the process, then you'll always be happy because you always have that. No one can take it away from you. Sometimes, sometimes you have to guess at what's required. You just kind of take a shot at it, and that typically doesn't have very good outcomes. Missing crucial required pieces of the proposal or of the argument that you're trying to make. So what is crucial and what is required? How do you know that? That's going to be part of 3 and 4. We'll address that then. If you don't hear from people in time, so if you kind of depend on people who aren't that reliable, that can also be a problem. And not knowing who to contact. If you don't know who to contact, if you need feedback on something and you don't know who to contact, or talk to me. I have a network and I'm happy to try to connect you with people and get you resources that you need. That's what I'm here for. And so just this third category, things that make other people not happy, even if the grant is successful, right? Doing things last minute will always make other people not happy with you. If you're asking simple questions whose answers are located in the documentation that's available to you, will always make other people not happy. Like, am I eligible for this grant? Sometimes that's not so clear and you do need some help figuring that out, right? But if you're trying to apply for something you're not eligible for, that will definitely make people not happy. Not flagging things that you need ahead of time. So it's great when I get an email from someone saying, hey, I'm applying for a grant in a month. This is the deadline. And now I have in my mental map, okay, this person is going to need my help. I need to adjust my schedule. I need to include them in my, I need to put them on my radar. When people just pop up on the radar and they say, I have a deadline in 2 days, can you do something for me? That is not optimal, right? Also, not following the process that those people expect you to. So not doing things according to the way that they're used to doing things, that can also present some difficulties, which, a lot of that stems from just bad project management. So having some project management skills is critical. And also others, won't be happy if your grant costs them money. So sometimes people will submit budgets that don't actually pay for all of the costs that might be accrued, or you might formulate a proposed budget based on one idea of what it costs to hire someone, when in fact it costs a different amount. So if that budget were to go through, the department or the faculty would be on the hook for that money. So you don't want to be successfully getting a grant and making the faculty have to pay money because you got the grant. That's not the situation that we want to be in. I have a feeling that I'm moving very fast and that this is a ton of information. So does anyone have any questions? This is not your only opportunity to ask questions. If there are things that you want to get in touch with me about later and talk about, like, oh, you said this, what did you mean? Feel free to get in touch. But at this point, does anybody have any any questions on this stuff? Pitfalls, problems?
Michael, could you go back to number 2, just so I can take a look at something, because my Zoom froze quickly. Just, yeah, that one. All right, okay, thanks.
Hi, Michael. Yeah, thanks a lot for this. I was just wondering about the compliance part that you mentioned. And I mean, I have realized in my personal experience that like every grant has its own different compliance documents. So are there any strategies? So I understand it's a learning experience, but is there a better way to manage it, or you just learn it from your experience and you keep the documents for 1 year, and next year if you apply for the same grant, then you already know that that was the template there, or the additional documents or which were required, because maybe some of them will ask for diversity or gender balance, or that you have a certain number of participants. Others will ask for ethical statements or from different consortia partners, and so on and so forth. So I was just wanted to know your insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those pieces you can keep, from year to year, and that sometimes you have to adapt that stuff for, particularly if it's a different funder. Also, situations might change both at the university or in the department, and there will be information that you want to include. It can also be that the requirements sometimes change. So, Horizon Europe proposals now are expecting you to articulate your a gender diversity plan, and it might have been enough in the past for people to say, oh well, we're going to hire this many women, or this is the gender balance of the team, and so forth. But that's not what they mean anymore. That's not sufficient anymore. There has to be a more sophisticated approach, not just to gender and those impacts, but to other elements of diversity, right? So in that sense, sometimes the things that you used last year don't work. Also, there are some parts of the compliance piece that are just boilerplate. So there will always be a description of like the university, right? You should not have to generate that information on your own. Someone will have a version of that. The funding advisor, I have boilerplate that's used, and all of the faculty, all of the funding advisors share that boilerplate widely. So if you look at something and you go, I don't know how to even begin writing that, ask the funding advisor, because they may in fact have text for you to use. I'll say on the gender and diversity stuff, I've been developing for the university, I've been writing a kind of set of prompts or guides for researchers to be able to work through, which kind of asks them about the different dimensions of diversity that they have in their proposal and where they can talk about those dimensions in their proposal. So it's not only contained in the gender diversity section or plan, but you can put it in different places. And the idea or the expectation is that, particularly now, that more competitive proposals will be ones that have fuller and richer statements about diversity in them. Does that help, Rohan?
Yes, definitely. Thanks a lot.
Did anyone else? Does anyone else here want to answer Rohan or have any other insight for Rohan? Okay. And so if there's no other questions, I'll just keep going with 4. You know, I won't do that. It's almost we're 45 minutes in. So what I'm going to do is just let's have a 10-minute break. Sorry, let's have a 5-minute break and come back at 14. Let's come back at 14:55, and I'll keep going. How's that? I need some faces. Okay, how's that work? 14:55. See everybody then? Okay. Okay, good. There it is. So I've got 2 more sections to go, and neither of them are very long, but then I want to close with switching over to Research Connect and helping get you set up with personalized searches there. So when I say sort of fit in the big picture, I mean, fit in terms of institutional goals. And I'm going to present sort of 2 ways for understanding this. One of these is a map of different kinds of grants based on 2 dimensions. And one dimension is just who determines the problem that they want to see proposals on. So if it's a bottom-up grant, that means you get to choose or determine what you write about or what you propose. Otherwise, it's a top-down grant where they say, we're really interested in seeing proposals on AI, ethics in AI applications in healthcare. From that point, you can develop your grant, but they are the ones who are defining the specific domain in which that works. So that's one dimension. The other dimension is collaboration. Basically, are you working by yourself? Are you working with other people? And also, are you submitting the grant on your own versus are you submitting with a group of other people? And this is the way that a lot of the opportunities that we'll see sort of map into this space. So, mobility grants, fellowships, things that PhDs would be applying for sort of fall into that top left quadrant, right? Other grants like that are very good targets for beginning grant writers are the Diversity and Inclusivity grants, the SWOL grants, the Maastricht Working on Europe, and also Faculty of Law has some internal funding for doing things. This is not all of the grants that would fall in those spaces, but those are the low-hanging fruit and some of the immediate things. Then, down in the lower right quadrant, there's more activity in other faculties, but there is some in the Faculty of Law related to Horizon Europe, and also the research by what is it called? Research by Paths, the NWA work, the Dutch research agenda. There's another kind of funding activity that happens at the Faculty of Law, which is not grants, but tenders. And most tenders sort of occupy that lower right-hand corner also, where they say, we are looking specifically for some sort of solution related to this, and you will work on it with a group of people, probably because what they're asking for is just too much for one person to do on themselves, although there are some tenders which individuals can submit. Here's another grid, and it kind of derive from the previous one, which is why it looks exactly the same. But it's mapping projects in two different ways. One, along economic impact. So basically, where does the funding for the project come from, right? And the other one is academic impact. Now, we could talk for a long, long time about what actually constitutes academic impact, and that would be a very interesting discussion. I bet that probably we would mostly agree on what academic impact is. So I'm just going to bracket that conversation and say, for the purposes of this, that that we know, that we all agree and know what it is. What's interesting is that most dissertations, right, really seem to exist in the B and D squares, right? Although ideally someone might hope for it to have high academic impact. It depends on the topic, and it depends on the approach. Also in B are most tenders, right? Money comes from outside, the project is fully financed, but there's really not a lot of academic impact. There is the possibility of doing some academic research and tying that into a tender, but it's not the high academic impact that a grant typically has. So most researchers, I would say, are shooting for A. That's the space that that people want to occupy. So high academic impact, and it's fully financed, meaning it's not drawing from anyone else's budget, right? But is coming from an external source. But the reality is probably you sometimes have to live in C, right? Producing stuff of high academic impact, but the funding comes from an internal budget. And to the degree that, people might be just like writing papers based on desk research, which doesn't require lots of external funding, that would be kind of in the C space. You probably don't want too much D, or if there is, you want to justify it. So probably most of the deans that you're going to encounter are going to want to be in A. But there's three ways to sort of use this matrix, which I think are interesting. You could plot the trajectory of your project or your idea or even your career across these spaces, right? So what's the optimal place for you to start, and where do you want to end up? And then plot a path accordingly. How do I get from low academic impact to high academic impact? And how do I change the funding model for the project? And then you can also ask, what's the mix of projects in the research group or the faculty, right? And this is something that I'm interested in knowing for the faculty as a whole, right? Where is most of the activity? Is it an A, B, C, or D? And what is the most sustainable kind of perspective as well? And then what are the ambitions of the research group or the faculty? But again, I think most individual and institutional goals aim for A. So that's very high level kind of stuff about where grant writing fits in the institution. At this point, does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay. So what's a good funding opportunity? This is the last thing that I want to present on. A good funding opportunity is going to depend on a lot of things that I don't know, right? That only you can say, because it's based on your specific ambition. It's based on your topic, your area, and where you are, in your career. But in general, right, the good funding opportunity, when you look at it, you go, oh, I can do that. The amount of time that I have and the amount of energy that I have, it's feasible, right? It's also one that fits your impact profile. So if you want to, be, working on a 5-year project that finishes with a monograph and 3 conferences, right? That's one kind of grant. If you just want to go somewhere and write a paper, then that's a different kind of grant. The good opportunity is also one that's going to fit your sustainability needs, right? What do you need? Do you need to cover 30% of your time? Do you need to cover 100% of your time? What would you have to give up in order to be able to do a project? Those are considerations as well. Then there's also what the content of the project is, what you would be writing about. Do you have a viable angle on a particular topic? If you have a good angle, right, on what they're asking for, then that's a good opportunity. If you don't have an angle, then it's a longer shot. I talked about this in the PhD meeting, but it's worth returning to, just because I was talking about impact and sustainability. What is the relevance of funding for your career? What it does is it can boost the sustainability and the impact that you have in your career, and it can allow you to be flexible. It can allow you to move to different parts of this space. But what I want to visit specifically is, how can you tell from the call how good the funding opportunity is? And the way that I get at this topic was through a little bit of research that I did in 2019, where I was having to learn about Horizon 2020 myself. So I reached out to people who were experts in Horizon 2020, and I asked them to read the funding call, a specific funding call, and I asked them to just kind of talk aloud about what they were reading and what they were thinking and how they were responding in their heads. And that really gave me a lot of insight into how experts read a call and the kinds of resources that they bring to reading a call and evaluating it. Is this something that I want to participate in or not? And so I just want to run through, what those things are. I mean, obviously, the most important thing was the call text itself, right? What was in front of them. Now, interestingly, they don't read the call text from the top to the bottom. They don't read it in linear order. They have a specific thing that they look for and that they go to first. Sometimes it's the budget, which gives them information about competitiveness. Sometimes it's about the scope. So what are they going to be expected to do? What is going to be required? And what is suggested? What is a suggested content? And I thought that was a really important and interesting finding. So they use the call text. They use their buzzwords or their keywords or their trigger terms, the things that they use to describe their work and by which their work is kind of known in the larger field. They also know how their work might have been categorized or labeled with older buzzwords or keywords, right? Because sometimes the underlying work is the same, but fashion comes and fashion goes, and it gets different labels. So they look for buzzwords in the call, right, and try to see something that looks like buzzwords that they themselves use for their own work. And legal researchers might have some of these kinds of things as buzzwords. They might even be more specific than this, right? These experts, they also had in their heads a list of potential collaborators. I mean, of course, you're going to have as a list of potential collaborators, the research support staff here at the faculty, right? You're going to have mentors and supervisors. You'll also have peers, people who would be willing to read things and give you feedback on them. And also people who might have applied to a similar thing in the past and who can share a proposal with you that is either that was successful or not successful. Another thing, by the way, that we have in the faculty that we can share sometimes are successful proposals. So you should always check with me or Deanna when you're applying for something. Do we have an example of this that I can look at? But for research collaborators, they'll also know the names of those people and the organizations they work for and the types of organizations. So it won't always be other academics. It could also be social partners, or it could be companies who can all serve as collaborators. And they know the buzzwords of those collaborators, right? So they know, okay, well, if I'm going to do ethics of AI, they know they're already calling up in their head the people that they could work with who kind of match to that buzzword. These experts also knew how to generate an angle, how to make something stand out or be unusual, and they bring this to the reading of the call. So they look at it and they go, yeah, I've got an idea. I would probably do this, right? But I know that that's not that special, so maybe, so I can't be competitive with that. Sometimes they know, oh, I've got a really good way. I know that what I'm working on, no one else is working on, so this would be a good direction for me. They have a load of background knowledge. Now, these are experts. These are people who have been doing this for a long, long time, but it's useful to know the kinds of things that they brought to bear on their interpretation, right? So they knew kind of funder values in politics. This is obviously more important for like EU and Dutch kinds of grants, but even like foundations, even SWOL, right? Even our local grant, like they have specific sorts of values that are linked to specific outcomes that they want to see. There's also an internal politics to all of these things, and understanding those is also important. They knew the competitive field, so they knew who else might be applying for this particular grant, and they knew how those competitors had been funded in the past. So, and for a particular mechanism, they might know who had been funded in the past on something, and so they would know whether it was worth their even trying something out. They have a feel for what's fundable. They just kind of have an intuition, like a sense of like what you can get away with and what might be interesting. And, you know, they have experience as reviewers. So even as they're reading the call, they're starting to formulate a proposal using their experience as reviewers and as researchers in order to formulate this. And they also have these kind of intuitions that they're using, and it's going to take a long, long time to develop these intuitions. I wish there was just a pill that you could take that would give you these kinds of expert level intuitions, but there isn't, unfortunately. Now, interestingly, these guys, there are women here too. The compliance part of the proposal was not something that they really thought about. They were thinking mainly about the X. And I think that's because they were dealing with a large consortium of people, and they assumed that it was other people who were going to be dealing with the compliance pieces and not themselves. So I thought that was interesting. There were some other questions that they asked themselves, like, who's sending this to me? If it was a funding call that someone sent to them, they go like, why are they sending, who is sending this to me and why? Sometimes they send things because they want you to participate. Sometimes it's just because they, think they know your buzzwords and they're being friendly and they want to give it to you. Sometimes they want to know if you're a potential competitor. So who's sending this to me is a crucial question. They also look at the timeline. Who else is in the consortium? And then there's this question, how big is the budget? So if it's a small budget and the call says they're only going to fund one grant, then they know it's not that competitive. It's not worth my time. But if it's a larger budget and they're going to fund 6 or 10 projects at 5 million euro a piece, well, maybe that's the thing that I want to go for. And then they're also evaluating them for themselves. Do I have the energy to do this? What's my level of ambition at this point? And that can fluctuate quite a lot. So just really quickly, like, what is reading a call? For these people, reading a call is a non-linear process. So non-linear, they don't read from the top to bottom. They go to the place that gives them, they know will give them information about whether or not they should be involved, right? So it's a nonlinear process of creating and revising hypotheses. So they don't get fixed on any one thing. They sort of try it out, go like, oh, I think they want this sort of thing. And then they read a little further and they go, oh no, I think they want, so they're projecting themselves into the minds of the funders in a way to try to understand what is wanted, number 3, and what is required, number 4, and how easy it would be for them to satisfy that, to meet that. By 5, mapping their little internal model against the network of people that they have. And again, this is for very large consortium grants, but I think it works for other kinds of grants too, because you've got to be thinking about who am I going to call on in order to make my snowball, in a sense. And then as they are reading the text of the call, they are already writing the proposal. They are already writing at a very high level what they're going to put into the proposal and imagining the way that reviewers are going to respond to it. And this is just a little more detail on reading a call. All of these slides are going to be available for you later. But does anybody have any questions about that stuff as well? And then I want to switch over to Research Connect after. But does anybody have any questions about that? Yeah, kind of. I mean, Anna says, so basically this is like writing a job application, just academically. And yeah, that's a good way to think about it. Any other questions?
Yes, I might have a question. I don't know if you can hear me well enough.
Okay, yep.
Fantastic. So in terms of reaching out to people, I believe it was a point that you made on when you read the call and you consider things or people who you might involve and collaborate with, and then obviously also the budget support staff at your respective university. I was wondering, if you're working in a consortium, so with more partners, does it serve to connect the budget support staff at the individual universities with each other? So does it serve for funding advisors at the individual partner universities to also collaborate and get in touch with each other? Or would that be arguably counterproductive, considering what everyone has on their own plate at their home university?
Sometimes it can be advantageous for those people to be in touch, but I haven't seen that they typically are. So in these consortium grants, there will be a lead right, coordinator, and whoever the budget person is at that coordinating institution kind of takes the lead. And then there's a little bit of traffic between the coordinator and the partners. But I don't know about close collaboration, but that question is probably best answered by Diana, who's on the call. So maybe she could answer that. Diana, could you answer that? How much do you interact with the financial people of partners if Maastricht is leading a collaborative grant?
Well, what we usually do, they sort of inform us of the number of person months that our staff would be involved, and then more detailed per staff member of our faculty involved. We get the person months or the number of days or hours spread over the duration of the project, and then we allocate the cost to that. And then we also, of course, try to sort of set up a non-staff budget, travel, subsistence, field work, organizing and attending conferences, stuff like that. Now, so we sort of create our own budget based on the content. That is sent back to the coordinator, the lead partner in the proposal, and they then try to sort of, well, put together a nice budget in which partners are, well, I wouldn't say equally, because if you have countries like Belgium, Germany, the more northern countries, they're very expensive compared to countries like Spain and Italy. So there will not always be an equal divided budget, because staff costs in the Eastern European countries and the Southern countries are far lower than the more north situated countries. But yeah, it's the lead partner who finally comes up with what I would call a consolidated budget, in which, if we are lucky, he just took over 100% of the budget that we created and that we proposed, or made some minor changes. But those minor changes, of course, have been discussed, and those are discussed thoroughly, yes. I mean, if they say, like, you put in person X, Y, and Z for a certain amount of time, there's a cost to it. Now, they can't just expect our staff to be involved a certain amount of time and not be compensated for that time. So depending on how easy and how smoothly the proposal goes and the conditions set, there's more or less discussion involved. So that's depends really on the parties involved and on the budget available.
Super, thank you.
You're welcome.
I couldn't see who asked that question, but was that helpful?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then of course, in session 3, we'll be revisiting things like that. And Deanna's going to have a major role in session 3. So any questions about budget formulation, you can bring up then. So if there's no immediate questions about this, I'm going to stop sharing, but then start sharing again just to get out of this. And then this I want to do. I want to do this. So you should, go to your browser and go it's search search.myresearchconnect.com. And you'll get to this field. Now, don't use the login stuff. Do login via your institution, right? And you can just start typing Maastricht, and you'll get that. And then you'll come to this login screen. And then you're here. If you hit search, there are a couple ways to do a search, 4 ways. You can put keywords, those buzzwords, kind of trigger words, things in this bar right there and search. And you can see that this is a search that I use to get things for the Faculty of Law. Then you can also search using the filters along the left-hand side. Now, what's interesting about this for people who are PhD students is that you can select for a number of different things, right? So fellowships, scholarships, as well as grants. So it's possible that, even if you're not in the market for a research grant, that you can look over here and still use this and have this turn up stuff. You can look at the source, the deadline. So there's a number of ways that you can filter everything in their database. So that's the second form of search. The third form of search is through combining the keyword search and the filter, right? And then what you can do is you can save the search and you get it so that you can have searches emailed to you on a daily basis. Any changes to items that would come up in the search. So you would just save the search, and well, I guess got to run it. So you'd save a search. I'm gonna add a new search. I'll call it, test, and do that. And then, sorry, I haven't looked at this in a while. Sorry, before I do that, I want to talk about a fourth kind of search that is often useful for people who are working in interdisciplinary kinds of fields, where if you click over on here, summary search, it allows you to put in a bunch of text, say from like an abstract of a paper or the first couple paragraphs of a paper or something like that. And it will do some NLP on the text and give you a set of results that are based on the, based on the contents. So if you're working, like Rohan, I know what you work on, that might be actually a pretty interesting way for you to call up some stuff rather than having to choose either a law or a technology kind of keyword search, right? But let me get to the search. Okay, so you see there, you can add the, when you save the search, you can add the name of the search and then you can get it to send you email alerts based on the search. Now this says weekly. You can go and you can find the, there's some preferences by which you can set this to send you things on a daily fashion. I get things daily, but maybe that's too much for you. Weekly, you know, might be more than enough. One of the you know, traditionally, one of the functions of the funding advisor is to compile lists of opportunities and mail them out to people. And the faculty is such a diverse group that it's really hard for me, particularly since I've been there for 7 months or something like that, to know exactly what everybody's working on. So it would actually work better if, I think, if everyone was signed up on Research Connect and they did regular searches and look for stuff. You know, it tends to it looks like the results tend to be updated with enough time, right, to put a proposal together. So you wouldn't have to do that 3-week SLAM schedule that I presented earlier. You'd have enough lead time. And sometimes, you know, maybe you're not ready this year to apply to something, but you would be ready sometime in the future. So I strongly encourage people to get onto Research Connect, and just like you should be on academic transfer and be looking at that just to see what is going on out there. Does anybody have any questions about using Research Connect? Is anyone already on Research Connect? Does anyone already use it? No. Okay. I was very surprised several months ago when I heard that this was not widely used in the faculty at all. There are other databases out there. This is the one that the university has a subscription to, so it's free. It's free for us to use, and I think that it's pretty good. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming and attending this. Again, if you have any questions and you want to be in touch, do that, you know, at any point. I would strongly recommend coming to next week's if you're interested in the writing elements of how to put a proposal together. And I really come at that, you know, both as a writer and as a linguist. I strongly recommend the third session, which, you know, the important part of that, I think, is getting to meet some of the other research support staff at the faculty and understanding, particularly the budget, you know, how to formulate a budget, how to think about what a budget contains. That's often a stumbling block. Or a big learning curve there. And then the fourth one, I also recommend, because that is about providing you with a way of writing these, and also writing proposals, but also analyzing proposals that other people have done. I know that proposals circulate, right? But it's the fourth session that will give you the tools to really like make sense of the proposal that you get from somebody else. So all of this is a package, but I understand that people have lots of other demands. So if you got other stuff to do, I understand. All of these will be recorded, and if you and all of the slides distributed to people who came. But thanks so much for coming today, and I will see some or all of you next week. Have a good rest of the week and a good weekend. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye.